Story. Luffy woke up. That fact alone startled him. He almost never slept well. And he very rarely woke up without being a screaming, sweating wreck. That's how most nights went. Either no sleep, or troubled sleep resulting in being woken by the same nightmare at about 1 in the morning and not sleeping again after that. But he was awake. Then he became more aware of his sensors. The familiar scent of tangerines. The familiar pain in the gut. The familiar warmth in his arms. Wait. He opened his eyes, squinting in the light. When he could see clearly, his gaze settled on the familiar head of ginger hair. He smiled to himself. Nami. He closed his eyes again and listened to her breathing. Eventually, she began to stir. Luffy sighed, enjoying the last of the peaceful moment. He opened his eyes and watched his navigator slowly look up, meeting his gaze. He expected to see her face go red, and for her to squirm away, but she just looked up at him. Then she did something completely unexpected. She pulled herself forwards and kissed him softly. He closed his eyes, in shock. He felt his cheeks heat up and knew Nami was the same as she pulled away and buried her face in his chest, embarrassed. He chuckled and began to trace circles on her back. She shuddered in his arms. After a few more minutes, she finally sat up, looking down at him. Her face still held a reddish hue. "You hungry?" she asked, knowing it was a pointless question. He grinned and nodded, shooting an arm up to grab a beam on the room. He sat up, gently wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. Then he slipped off the bed, pulling her with him, and lowered the two of them to the floor. He set her down and let go of the beam, flipping back to absorb the impact of his arm. Nami waited for him to go before falling in behind him as he exited the room, not sure what awaited them in the kitchen. The night before, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp and Chopper had all packed up and headed to bed straight after dinner. Chopper and Usopp were first out the door, still chatting away and giggling about whatever stupid thing Usopp had said. They opened the door to the bunk room and froze, both of them staring into the room with their jaws on the floor. Zoro and Sanji came up behind them, curious as to what the two of them were gawping at. "Hey, what's up?" Zoro had said. The two didn't reply. They were in shock. Sanji and Zoro turned to follow their gaze and noticed their captain sound asleep. "Well, would you look at that?" Sanji muttered. "The captain's finally getting some res. Hang on, is that Nami with him?" He promptly feigned, even before Zoro could smack him in the head for being so loud. He chuckled to himself. Well, he muttered. Didn't see that one coming. They were now sitting around the table in the same awkward silence as they waited for their captain to enter, likely with the navigator. None of them knew what the hell to say. It was definitely going to be bloody awkward. And sure enough, the duo entered the room. Luffy was grinning like the clueless idiot he was, and ran straight over to the plate of food Sanji had left on the bench and carried it over to the table where he began scarfing it down. Nami looked slightly pink in the face and carefully kept her gaze averted. Even so, the crew watched her hurry through the kitchen and grab her food before taking her seat next Luffy. No words were spoken for a long time. When they did, they came from Zoro. "Well," he said. "You two sure made this awkward for everyone." Chopper nodded. Luffy looked up at him confused. "What do you mean awkward?" he asked with his mouth full of food. His eyes widened as he swallowed, a look of realization on his face. "Oh, I get it," he said. A grin stretched over his face and he began to laugh. "It's because Nami cut him off with an angry smack over the head. Promoted stories. You'll also like Unexpected Love. 1241. Monkey D. Luna is no ordinary girl. She was born different. She can manipulate plants' life. She is the twin sister of Monkey D. Luffy. Like her brother, she wants to be One Piece. The Alternative Revision. 1.2K30. The story will be changed but in future. Still the storyline same just bit change since there will be character insert into the story changing the timeline disclaimer. Mysterious Girl on the Straw Hat Ship 1. 7K379. YN, a kind, lovely and beautiful girl who died while saving puppy god transmigrat into world of pirates. She also have unique power, as long as she wish any anime power. The Heart and Soul of Monkey D. Luffy. 1p. 1.1K59. This story follows Luffy after a fateful encounter with a seemingly ordinary 18-year-old girl named Arya. Tragic circumstances lead to Arya joining Luffy's ragtag pirate. Nurse One Piece Law X Reader. 164K5.9K. Ongoing. Story begins in Sabayati Archipelago, the Wicked Witch of the West. That's literally what YN is if you think about it, a witch from the West Blue. My brother's keepsake, Sabo X Reader. 126K 4.8K. After the death of Portgas D. Ace, the Navy wished to prevent the continuation of the bloodline of the Pirate King. They send soldiers to an island on the Grand Line where a second chance One Piece fanfiction. 384K 8.8K. Complete. Finally, after years of fighting, Monkey D. Luffy arrives at Lawtail and becomes Pirate King. But he has lost a lot to get here. All of his friends are Dia. Shut up, moron, she snapped. Zoro laughed, and Chopper and Usopp joined in. Sanji was still staring down at his plate, on a different planet. Come on, Nami. Usopp chuckled. It not like it's a massive secret or anything. He caught her eye and promptly shut up, as did the rest of the group. Only Zoro continued to chuckle at how red she'd gotten. She picked up her plate and put it on the bench before storming out of the room. Luffy watched her leave, confused. The others said nothing. What's up with her? Luffy asked. Usopp grinned at him. She's just embarrassed. He said knowingly. Yeah, but why? What's there to be embarrassed about? Luffy continued in all his innocence. The three others, Sanji having been completely forgotten about, sighed and pressed their hands into their foreheads. Well, it's obviously because the two of you slept together. Usopp explained. Luffy looked blank, so Zoro took over. She's embarrassed because you two obviously like each other and now we're in on your little romance. Understanding spread over Luffy's face, but he only chuckled. I get it, he said. I do like Nami, but I really don't think she feels the same way. The crew gawped at him. Since when had Luffy ever thought about things that deeply? They were surprised enough that he was aware of his feelings towards another person, let alone understand the concept to that extent. He was about to make another comment, but a shout from outside cut him off. Hey you guys, Nami called. Get out here. They all hurried outside. Nami was standing on the raised part of the deck looking through a pair of binoculars. She heard the others approach and looked down at them. I've got good news and bad news, she explained. Good news is, we're approaching an island. The bad news is, we're also approaching a marine's ship. Luffy jumped down from the deck and climbed up onto the head of the Mary, scanning the horizon. Sure enough, there were two dark, distant shapes. He turned to grin back at the others. You ready? Sometime later, the crew were all standing along the side of the Mary, ready for battle. Only Nami hung back. Hey guys, she called. Something's not right here. The Marines wouldn't approach us with only one ship. We're wanted criminals. Luffy looked blank. Why yeah, Usopp agreed, quivering in fear. But only for that reason. I sure would love to kick their asses, but they must be really strong if they're approaching alone. Chopper nodded and hid behind Usopp. Luffy just gave him a blank stare. So? He asked, clueless. The stronger the opponent, the better the fight. Sanji and Zoro agreed, but the other three just looked exasperated. It was Zoro who noticed the flag. "Hey, you guys," he said, turning back around. "White flag." He nodded towards the top of the ship. The others noticed it as well and nodded. Luffy huffed and sat down on the deck. "Boring," he whined, pouting. Nami smacked him over the head, and he promptly shut up. Usopp pulled his goggles down over his eyes and peered over the edge of the ship. "Is that?" he muttered, squinting. Everyone looked at him, curious. Suddenly, he let out a yell. "It's Robin." Of everyone on the crew, Zoro's reaction was the most extreme. "What?" he yelled, grabbing the binoculars and peering through them. Sure enough, Robin was there, standing on the deck of the ship and waving her arms in the air to get their attention. "Hey Luffy," Zoro said, whirling around to his captain. "Launch us over." Luffy grinned and nodded, wrapping an arm around Zoro and flinging the off over to the marine's ship to grab onto the railing. Nami started to yell at them, but they were gone in an instant. She just sighed and kept an eye on the approaching ship. If there was any trouble, the two of them could handle it. She heard a yell and watched as Zoro crashed face first into the side of the ship. Luffy landed perfectly and looked in confusion at the empty space in his arm where Zoro had been. Nami couldn't help but chuckle. "Moron," she muttered. "Zoro," Luffy called, turning around and scratching his head blankly. Zoro climbed up to the top of the deck looking very mad. His face was red from smacking into the deck and there was blood trickling from his nose. "Oh, there you are," Luffy said, carelessly. "Don't run off like that." Zoro promptly smacked him over the head. "It's not like I tried to," he yelled. "Well, hello to you too," came the calm voice that saved Luffy's rubber ass. Zoro forgot about the confused boy and turned to Robin. The two of them shared a warm embrace before turning to help Luffy up. Robin had been trying to record what she learned from the poneglyph before she caught back up to the others, but a visit from the Marines caught her off guard. They found her whilst she was sleeping and arrested her. She woke up on the ship and promptly dealt with the Marines. She then decided she had enough information and went to join back up with the others. She was glad to see that nothing had changed in her absence. Luffy was still dumb. Zoro was still Zoro. She chuckled as she helped her poor captain off the ground mid-beating. Despite his punched-up face, he smiled at her. She couldn't help but return the smile, even if her small grin could never match her captain's wide beam. She then turned to Zoro, who was watching the two of them but not really paying attention, more just staring off into space. "Time to go," her captain announced. Then he paused, looking puzzled. "Oh, right, Zoro, you hold on to Robin," Luffy instructed. Zoro snapped out of his daydream, nodding. "Right." Robin felt him gently wrap an arm around her waist while Luffy slung his own arm around Zoro. "Here we go, now gum, gum." Luffy's final word was lost as the three of them were sent flying through the air. Nami watched the three of them come hurtling back to the ship. For once, it looked like Luffy was being slightly more careful. The three of them landed right on the middle of the deck. Luffy landed on his back and lay there laughing while Robin carefully caught herself and Zoro in a web of hands. "You're just in time, Robin," Nami said, hugging her friend. "We're on our way to that island over there. I don't know what it's going to be like." Robin chuckled. "I may not have known you guys for very long," she said. "But you really are pirates, aren't you?" She continued to laugh while the others just watched her in confusion. Meanwhile, they had all been so distracted they hadn't noticed the island approaching. Guys," Luffy asked from where he was now perched on the lion's head of the Mary. Nami turned to look at him. She did a double take as she realized how close the island had gotten. "What are you morons doing? Get your asses in gear and anchor the ship," she yelled. The others went into the usual frenzy that came with dropping anchor. Soon enough, they were ready to go. They all piled into the lifeboats. Hey you guys, Chopper squeaked, pointing up. Look at that, just around that corner there is a bay. It looks like there might be a village. The others all turned and, sure enough, found that they had dropped anchor on the other side of a cliff face that surrounded a small sandy horseshoe-shaped bay. There was a small, happy-looking village built along the coast that was surrounded by a rather strange environment. Below the cliff, there was a forest. On top of it, it looked like a grassy plain. This place looks cool, Luffy chirped, throwing his arms up and nearly causing the boat to capsize. Oi, pipe down, moron. Everyone yelled, glaring at him. They rowed steadily into the port, pulling into the small boat ramp. A group of locals were sitting on it with rods dangling in the water. Luffy watched them with intense interest. That's pretty cool, hey Nami, he asked in his usual childish tone. Those guys are fishing off the land. That's weird. Hey, I wonder if they caught anything. Can I go ask them? Nami sighed, exasperated by his usual whining. Deep down, she found it funny and, in a way, kinda cute, but she would never, ever, admit that to her captain. Go on then, she dismissed him. Do what you want. Just don't start a war or anything, Kay, she shot him a stern look. Yeah, sure thing, he replied, grinning, before running off to talk to the fishermen. They were friendly enough and showed Luffy their catches, which only impressed him and made him want to catch one. Luckily, Sanji intervened before Luffy could be more of a pain to the locals and dragged him off to explore the island.